I knew something was off the second I saw that sign, just drifting down the creek like it had given up on life. You know, the kind of laminated private property sign you hang up thinking it'll actually mean something. Yeah, that one, floating like a sad little raft. I just stood there for a second, boots in the mud, watching it spin slowly in the current, and I remember thinking, they really did it this time. Now, I'm not the kind of guy who goes looking for trouble. I moved out here to get away from noise, from people arguing over nonsense, from neighbors who think your mailbox is somehow their business. I bought this slice of land on the edge of Pine Hollow, tucked behind a tree line, quiet, peaceful, and yeah, it came with creek rights. Not shared access, not HOA controlled, not community-friendly water vibes. Mine. Legally mine. I checked that paperwork 3 times before signing. But see, the HOA? They didn't like that. And the face of that problem was a woman named, well, let's call her Diane Mercer. Mid-50s, always walking around like she's running for mayor of a place no one voted for, clipboard glued to her hand, oversized sunglasses like she's dodging paparazzi. And this tone, sweet on the surface but dripping with that, I think I'm smarter than you energy. You ever meet someone like that? Yeah, Diane. She'd already been testing me for weeks. First it was my shed windows, too reflective, apparently a hazard too. I don't know, migrating birds with self-esteem issues. Then it was my mailbox, non-compliant design, even though 3 other houses had the exact same one. Every note she left felt less like a rule and more like a poke, like she was waiting for me to react. But this was different. I followed the creek bend down past the old oak, and that's when I saw them, Diane and her 2 little echo chambers, Linda and Carol, sitting in folding chairs like they were on vacation, fishing lines cast into my creek, cooler beside them, Bluetooth speaker playing soft jazz like they were in some overpriced backyard resort. I just stood there for a second, letting it sink in. Then I cleared my throat. Loud. Diane turned slowly, like she'd been expecting me, smiled that plastic smile and goes, "Oh, hey there. We figured since it's just a small creek, it wouldn't hurt to enjoy it as a community." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because sometimes your brain just refuses to process stupidity without adding a soundtrack. "Let me stop you right there," I said, holding up the wet sign I'd pulled from the water. "This is private property. You're trespassing." Linda snorted like I'd just told a joke at a bad open mic. "Oh, come on. It's just water. Just water." "Yeah." So I walked back up to the house, grabbed a laminated copy of my deed. Yeah, I keep one in a Ziploc, because I've learned, and I came back, held it out like evidence in court. "This," I said, "says otherwise. Creek rights from the bridge down to the oak. That includes where you're sitting." Diane didn't even blink. She just waved her hand like she was swatting a fly. "We voted last month to open it up to HOA members." I stared at her. "You voted to give away something you don't own?" She shrugged. "We're not harming anything. And besides, we've been coming here for weeks." Weeks. That word hit different. Because suddenly this wasn't just some entitled afternoon picnic. This was a pattern. And patterns? Patterns leave evidence. I didn't argue anymore. Didn't yell, didn't threaten, just nodded, turned around, and walked back to the house. Because I had cameras. 4 of them, actually. Wired the whole back lot myself when I moved in, buried the lines, private server storage, nothing fancy but solid. I hadn't checked the creek cam in a while. Last time was some possum trying to drown itself in my tackle box. But now I had a reason. I pulled up the footage, and I swear, the second it loaded, my stomach dropped. There they were, not just fishing, not just sitting around pretending my land was their weekend escape. They had brought a chainsaw. 3 weeks back, bright and clear in the footage, Diane and 2 other board members, guys I recognized from HOA meetings I never wanted to attend, cutting down a dogwood tree, my dogwood tree. Clean cut, no hesitation, like they owned the place. They dragged the trunk a few feet and turned it into a bench. Then 2 days later, they're back. Bags of gravel, spreading it across the muddy path like they're installing a hiking trail. Next visit, rope swing. And the worst part? A group of kids, maybe 6 of them, splashing in the creek while the adults sat back, drinking like this was a resort they'd booked. I leaned back in my chair, just staring at the screen, trying to process how far this had gone. This wasn't just trespassing anymore. This was vandalism, liability, unauthorized construction, and yeah, stupidity at a level that almost deserves an award. I printed everything. Timestamps, still frames, every single moment they thought no one was watching. Locked the originals in a fireproof box. Then I made 2 calls. First, my friend. Let's call her Megan Cole, real estate attorney. Used to be a county prosecutor, sharp as hell, and not someone you want on the other side of a case. Second, the sheriff's office. By that afternoon, Deputy Lawson was standing in my backyard, arms crossed, watching the footage on my tablet. Didn't say much at first, just watched. Then he exhaled slow and goes, "Yeah, this is going in the report." I looked at him. "Can you cite them?" He shook his head slightly, almost amused. "We're past citations. You want to press charges?" And I didn't hesitate. "Yeah," I said. "I do." He nodded once, like he already knew that was coming. "All right then, criminal trespass, property damage, possibly more. You'll get a case number tomorrow." And as I watched him walk back to his cruiser, I remember thinking, this wasn't going to be a neighborhood dispute anymore. This was about to get real. All right, let me pause the story for a second, because this is where things usually get misunderstood, and honestly, this is exactly how people like Diane get away with stuff like this for so long. According to standard procedure, an HOA only has authority over properties that are explicitly included in its governing documents, meaning if your parcel isn't listed in their jurisdiction, they have zero legal power over you. Not limited power, not gray area, zero. And yeah, they'll still act like they do, because most people don't check. From a legal perspective, what they did wasn't just annoying, it stacked up fast. Trespassing, destruction of private property, unauthorized land modification, and the moment they invited other people onto that land, that opened the door to liability issues, especially with kids involved. If someone got hurt, guess who's responsible? The landowner, me. That's not just reckless, that's dangerous. And here's the part people don't talk about. This is a psychological trap. HOAs often rely on perceived authority, not actual authority. They push small rules first, mailbox, paint color, whatever, just to see if you comply. Once you do, they escalate. It's conditioning, plain and simple. The lesson here is, if you don't understand your rights, someone else will happily redefine them for you. So yeah, after that little analysis moment, things didn't calm down, they escalated fast. Next morning, I wake up, check my email, and there it is, case number confirmed, sheriff's report filed, and Megan already texting me like, "We're going to have fun with this." That's when you know it's serious, when your lawyer sounds excited. By noon, she had already reviewed my deed, easement language, boundary maps, all of it. She calls me, and I can't hear papers shuffling on her end, that focused kind of energy. "Your property line extends 6 feet past the north bank of the creek," she says. "The tree they cut? Fully inside your boundary. The gravel path? That counts as a structural alteration. And the swing?" She pauses for a second. "That's liability bait." I lean back in my chair, just listening. "And here's the kicker," she adds, voice dropping slightly. "Your parcel isn't even part of the HOA." I blinked. "Wait, what?" "You're adjacent," she says, "but not included in their governing documents. They've been sending you notices without jurisdiction. That's not just overreach, that's fraudulent behavior." I laughed, not loud, just that quiet kind of laugh when something clicks into place. So they've been pretending to have authority this whole time. Pretty much. That's when everything shifted. Because up until that point, I thought I was dealing with an overbearing HOA. Turns out, I was dealing with a group of people who didn't even have the legal right to talk to me, let alone touch my land. So we went all in. Megan drafted a civil suit, trespass, property damage, land restoration, legal fees, emotional distress. Yeah, we added that too. Then I drove down to the courthouse, filed everything, and by the time I got back home, something interesting had already started happening. Neighbors were talking, and I mean really talking, not the polite, "Hey, how are you" kind, but the "have you heard what's going on" kind. The grapevine lit up like someone flipped a switch. My neighbor across the street, let's call him Rick, retired mechanic, always smells faintly like motor oil, walks over while I'm unloading groceries and goes, "You really got them cited?" "Sure did," I said. He lets out this low whistle. "About time." And that right there? That was the moment I realized this wasn't just my fight anymore. Because one by one, people started coming forward. A couple down the block said they'd been fined over their driveway angle. A nurse mentioned daily penalties for parking too close to her mailbox, even though it met city code. Another guy said they tried to tell him his fence line was incorrect without ever checking his actual deed. Same pattern, different targets. So I started organizing everything. Not just my evidence, everyone's. Created folders, labeled them clean, false citations, boundary disputes, harassment, unauthorized actions. We weren't just building a case anymore. We were building a record. By the weekend, the HOA panicked, called an emergency meeting at the community center. I didn't go, didn't need to. Megan went in my place. And she didn't just show up, she showed up prepared. Every board member got a packet. Inside, my footage, the lawsuit, legal notice that they had no jurisdiction over my property, and a warning. Any further action would be considered harassment under state law. Megan told me later. Diane's face turned this deep shade of red, like someone had just unplugged her authority mid-sentence. And then, it started unraveling. One board member resigned within 48 hours. Another tried to backpedal, claiming she wasn't really involved. The rope swing? Gone overnight, like it magically disappeared. Didn't matter. The damage was already documented. The sheriff's office followed through. Formal citations issued to everyone involved. Trespassing, unauthorized land modification, endangerment. And here's the best part. Because they acted under personal authority, not official HOA jurisdiction, they had to pay out of pocket. Total fines? Just over 15 grand. Yeah, that stung. But that wasn't even the real hit. Because once the county got involved, things went from local drama to full-blown investigation. See, when Deputy Lawson filed his report, it flagged something bigger. The gravel they dumped near the creek? It had actually disrupted a protected runoff channel, which meant environmental regulations. And those? They don't play around. Within days, county inspectors showed up, not to check me, to audit the HOA. Turns out, they'd been pushing boundaries on multiple properties, literally. Encroaching on land they didn't own, modifying areas without permits, treating shared spaces like personal projects. One inspector even pointed out their community garden was sitting about 20 feet into county land. Yeah, so now it wasn't just me versus HOA. It was HOA versus everyone. Then came the real bombshell. One of the neighbors, retired biology teacher, quiet guy, keeps to himself, had been documenting drainage issues for months. When he saw my footage, he sent it straight to the state environmental department. That triggered a cease and desist order. No more land alterations. Immediate review. And right after that, the HOA's lawyer dropped them. Just like that. Conflict of interest, lack of disclosure, potential liability. Whatever the official wording was, the message was clear. You're on your own. And once that happened, everything cracked open. Emails got subpoenaed. Financial records pulled. And that's when the story stopped being about trespassing and started being about fraud. Turns out Diane and one of the board members had been approving reimbursements for maintenance equipment that didn't exist. Thousands of dollars routed through a landscaping company tied to a family member. Yeah, that kind of thing. 2 weeks later, Diane was arrested. No sirens, no dramatic scene. Just quiet, early morning, 2 cruisers, and suddenly the woman who acted like she owned the neighborhood was standing on her lawn in handcuffs. The other guy? Charged as a co-conspirator. And the rest of the board? Scrambling. Meanwhile, my civil case moved forward fast. Judge flagged it as public interest, governing body overreach, misuse of authority, all that. We won. Full compensation, property damage, restoration, legal fees. Court order requiring the HOA to publicly clarify their actual jurisdiction boundaries. But honestly, the money wasn't the win. The win was what came next. Because the residents, they were done. 40-plus homeowners signed a motion to remove the entire board. Not suspend, remove. Using a clause buried in the HOA's own charter. And with 2 members under criminal charges and the rest losing credibility, it passed. Unanimous. New board got elected within a month. Regular people this time. A nurse, a firefighter, that biology teacher. Actual neighbors, not self-appointed rulers. They froze all fines. Reviewed every policy. Cleaned house. And about a month later, I walked back down to the creek. No chairs. No music. No footprints that didn't belong. Just water, moving the way it's supposed to. I planted a new dogwood where the old one had been. Added a couple more cameras. Not because I was worried, just because I'd learned. And as I stood there, looking at that quiet stretch of land again, I remember thinking, It took a lot of noise to get back to this kind of silence. So yeah, that's how it ended. No HOA power trips, no fake authority letters in my mailbox, no one pretending they get to vote on things they don't own, just a quiet piece of land, a creek doing its thing, and a neighborhood that finally feels like, well, a neighborhood. But here's the part one keep thinking about, and honestly, it's the part that matters more than the lawsuit, the fines, even the arrests. None of this started with the chainsaw. It started with the little stuff. The mailbox note, the window complaint, the casual suggestions dressed up like rules. And I'll be real with you. Most people ignore those or just comply because it's easier. You don't want conflict. You don't want to be that neighbor. You tell yourself it's not a big deal. And that's exactly how it grows. The lesson here is boundaries don't get violated all at once. They get tested first, quietly, gradually. And if no one pushes back, that's when people like Diane take it as permission. And look, I'm not saying every HOA is bad. Some of them actually do what they're supposed to do, maintain shared spaces, keep things organized, protect property values. Cool. No problem with that. But the issue isn't the idea of an HOA. It's unchecked authority. Because once someone believes they can enforce something, they usually stop asking whether they should. From a legal perspective, this whole situation could have gone very differently if I didn't have documentation. Cameras, deed copies, timestamps. That stuff isn't paranoia, it's protection. People love to say, well, if you've got nothing to hide, you don't need proof. But that's not how the real world works. Proof isn't about guilt, it's about clarity. And here's something else most people don't realize. Just because someone sends you a notice doesn't mean it's valid. Authority has to come from somewhere concrete. A contract, a law, a documented agreement. Not a clipboard, not a tone of voice, not a group vote. If it's not written and legally enforceable, it's just noise. This is a psychological trap a lot of people fall into. You see a group acting confident, organized, official-looking, and your brain fills in the rest. They must have the authority. They must know what they're doing. Nope. Confidence is not legality. And fear? That's the tool. Because if you're unsure, you hesitate. If you hesitate, you comply. And once you comply once, it gets a lot harder to push back the next time. That's why situations like this don't explode overnight. They build. Quietly. Systematically. Until one day, someone's cutting down your tree and telling you they voted on it. And the crazy part? Most people still doubt themselves in that moment. I almost did. But here's the shift. The moment everything changes, it's when you stop asking, am I allowed to push back? And start asking, who gave them the right in the first place? That question, that's power. And look, I'm not saying you need to go to war with your neighbors or turn every disagreement into a legal battle. That's not the point. The point is awareness. Knowing where your boundaries are, legally, physically, personally, and being willing to stand on them when it matters. Because silence gets interpreted as agreement. And agreement becomes precedent. The lesson here is simple, but it's not easy. Understand your rights, document everything, and don't let someone else's confidence override your own reality. So now I'm curious, have you ever dealt with something like this? HOA overreach, a neighbor crossing the line, someone trying to enforce rules that didn't actually apply? Drop it in the comments. I read those. And trust me, stories like this, they're way more common than people think. Because at the end of the day, this wasn't really about a creek. It was about control. And what happens when someone finally says no?